The perfume she wore hit first, sharp, fake, clinging to my throat. As she spat, "You don't deserve Dad's will." Still, I didn't flinch. I just watched her hands shake as she grabbed the papers she hadn't earned. As the lawyer cleared his throat, the room shrank, tight with silence, thick with inheritance and lies. While she smiled at a paragraph she thought confirmed her power, I counted the lines she skipped. The same scent that once masked her cruelty now marked her downfall in front of everyone. That's when he read the final line, and her empire shattered with 4 simple words. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The air in Harold Briggs's office was too still, too polite for what was about to break. The mahogany table gleamed under the afternoon sun, but the people around it looked carved from tension. Nathan at the edge of his chair, Clara coiled beside him like a fuse waiting to be lit, and me, hands folded over the ring I still wore. Harold cleared his throat. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Robert Hayes." Clara's voice sliced through him. "We all know what's in it." She slapped the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. "You don't deserve Dad's will, Eleanor. You used him." For a moment the words didn't land. They hovered between us, ugly and gleaming. Nathan stared at the blinds, jaw tight. I'd raised that boy to speak truth, but lately he'd learned silence instead. I lifted my eyes to her. "Used him. I nursed him through the last 3 years of his life, Clara." She laughed, brittle. "You managed him, controlled every visitor, every decision, even his medication. Don't play saint." Harold tried again, steady but firm. "If we could continue?" But she was already leaning across the table, perfume sharp as accusation. "He would have wanted the company to stay with his family." "I am his family," I said quietly. That only fed her rage. "By marriage and manipulation." Nathan's chair creaked as he stood halfway, then sat back down. His eyes met mine for a second. There was shame there, but not courage. Harold pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Hayes, please. The will is clear. Let me finish reading before anyone jumps to conclusions." "Finish?" Clara snatched the document from his hands. The sound of the paper tearing a little at the edge felt obscene. "We already know what matters." She skimmed greedily, eyes darting over the lines she believed confirmed her inheritance. Her lips twisted into a smile that had no warmth. "See? Equal distribution of assets. Business holdings included. That's all we need." Harold exhaled through his nose, patient as a man used to watching people hang themselves with their own certainty. "Apparently not. You skipped the last line." Clara froze, the arrogance draining just a shade. "What last line?" "The one your father-in-law added a month before he passed." Nathan leaned forward. "Added? I didn't know." Harold reclaimed the papers from her clenched hands, smoothing them with deliberate care. "Robert's final instructions are to be read in full, in order." The room seemed to shrink. Outside, the palm fronds brushed the window pane, whispering secrets. Harold's voice carried the kind of gravity that makes even the guilty listen. "To my wife, Eleanor Hayes, for her steadfast loyalty and grace under fire, I leave my personal property, including the home and remaining trust accounts." Clara rolled her eyes. "Fine. She gets the house, we get the business." "Not yet finished," Harold said, gaze flicking toward me. An unspoken brace yourself. My heartbeat slowed, steadying the way it used to when Robert's health turned in the night. Grief had taught me discipline. Harold lowered his tone. "And to my son Nathan Hayes and his wife Clara Hayes, I leave my hope that they may earn through their actions what they once demanded by right." Clara's face reddened. "That's What kind of... Still not the last line, he said. The air shifted. Even Nathan looked uneasy now. Harold's eyes skimmed to the final sentence, still unread. Further instructions to be disclosed upon completion of this initial reading. He folded the paper carefully, his expression unreadable. That's where we stop today. Clara's laugh cracked, half hysterical. You can't stop there. What kind of trick is this? It's no trick, Harold said. It's exactly as Mr. Hayes specified. Nathan muttered. Dad wouldn't have done that. I finally spoke, voice level. He did when he realized how easily trust turns into entitlement. Clara shot up from her chair. You think this gives you power? You'll regret ever crossing me. I met her glare without flinching. Then I suppose we'll both find out what we've inherited. The office fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking behind Harold's desk. Somewhere in its slow rhythm I heard the echo of Robert's voice. Let them reveal themselves, Ellie. Truth always cashes its own check. When Clara stormed out, the air she left behind smelled like scorched perfume and fear. Nathan lingered, eyes wet, words unsaid. Harold gathered the will into its envelope, sealed it with a quiet snap. There's more, Eleanor. What she missed will change everything. I looked at the closed door where Clara had vanished. Then let her keep thinking she's already won. Harold nodded once, somber, until she hears the line she skipped. The next morning, Harold called before the sun had cleared the harbor mist. His tone was brisk, clipped with purpose. Eleanor, they're demanding the continuation of the reading. 9 o'clock. Same place. I'd barely slept. The echo of Clara's voice still scraped the edges of my mind. You don't deserve Dad's will. I'd told myself I wouldn't give her another ounce of my energy. Still, when I arrived at Harold's office, my hands trembled just enough that I clasped them tight in my lap to hide it. Clara was already there, pacing in her white suit as if preparing for battle. Nathan trailed behind her, pale and quiet, looking smaller than I remembered. Harold waited by the window, a second envelope resting on the table like a loaded weapon. Let's get this over with, Clara snapped, dropping into her chair. Her voice was sharp, but I caught the fray beneath it. Fear always hums before it breaks. Harold sat, adjusting his glasses with the ritual patience of a man who'd seen families unravel over paper and ink. Yesterday was the initial reading. Today, we proceed to the final clause. Nathan glanced at me. Dad really added something else? Yes, Harold said, unfolding the page with deliberate care. This portion was sealed to ensure it couldn't be tampered with or misread. The room fell silent except for the faint groan of the ceiling fan. Outside, church bells rang the half-hour, muffled by the glass. Harold began to read. His voice carried weight, every syllable deliberate. In gratitude for her unwavering loyalty, all controlling interest in Hayes Industries shall belong solely to my wife, Eleanor Hayes. The words hung there, dense, final. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the air seemed to halt. Clara's mouth opened, then closed again, as if the sound had been torn from her throat. Her eyes darted to Nathan. He didn't mean that. He couldn't have. Nathan looked stricken. That's impossible. Harold didn't flinch. It's legal, binding, and witnessed by 3 parties, including your father's accountant and the notary public who handled the trust documents. There's no ambiguity. Clara laughed once, a short, ugly burst. You forged it, both of you. I'm too old to risk prison for your paranoia, Harold said evenly. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the years between Robert's promises and this moment. Your father knew who stood by him when no one else did. That's not manipulation, Clara. That's devotion he recognized long after you stopped pretending to care. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mom, stop. This changes everything. It only clarifies it, I said. Clara shoved her chair back, the scrape echoing like a scream. You think you can run Hayes Industries? You couldn't even run a dinner table without him telling you which fork to use. Her venom found its mark, but I didn't move. Maybe not, but I learned how to survive dinners with people who bite the hand that fed them. Harold folded the document and placed it neatly into its envelope. There's a formal transfer process, Mrs. Hayes. You'll need to sign tomorrow. Clara lunged forward, palms on the table. You're not taking what's mine. It was never yours, I said softly. She turned on Nathan. Say something. Do something. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. He signed it, Clara. I saw his handwriting. Her face twisted, disbelief collapsing into fury. You saw it and said nothing? I didn't know what it meant. His words fell like stones. Harold stood, ending the performance. This session is concluded. Further discussion can occur with counsel present. But Clara didn't move. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling not from grief, but rage. This isn't over, Eleanor. You'll wish he'd never written that line. I met her stare, cold, steady. Oh, I think he knew exactly what he was writing. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the framed diplomas rattled on the wall. Nathan hesitated, torn between blood and loyalty, then followed her. When the office finally fell quiet again, I felt the tremor in my knees. Harold rested a hand on the table beside me. He did it to protect you. He said as much before he died. I nodded slowly. And now it's my turn to protect what's left of him. Outside, the Charleston light had shifted, warmer now, deceptive in its calm. As I stepped onto the porch, I saw Clara across the street by her car, phone pressed to her ear, eyes burning through me. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I knew the rhythm of vengeance when I saw it. I slipped on my sunglasses and started walking, the will secure in my bag, Harold's voice echoing behind me. She'll come for you next. I didn't look back. The war had already begun. The courthouse steps were already a battlefield. Word had leaked before we even exited Harold's office. Charleston's gossip networks were faster than any news wire. By the time the heavy wooden doors swung open, cameras flashed like lightning, microphones rose like spears, and the questions came in waves. Mrs. Hayes, did your husband leave you the entire company? Clara, how does it feel to be cut out? Is the family fighting over the will? Clara shoved past the crowd, sunglasses hiding nothing of her fury. Nathan trailed behind, head down, his hand brushing her elbow only for her to shake it off like a burn. The cameras followed her descent, heels clattering against the stone, a queen stripped of her crown in full daylight. I stayed at the top of the steps, the flashbulbs popping in rhythm to my heartbeat. The southern air was thick with heat and scandal. Harold stood beside me, stoic as ever, shielding me from a reporter who got too close. Mrs. Hayes, any comment? Someone shouted. I turned slightly toward them, my voice calm and measured. My husband left me more than money. He left me closure. The crowd murmured. Some looked disappointed, as if they'd come for blood and got grace instead. Harold leaned closer, murmuring under his breath, You handled that beautifully. It's easier when the truth's already on your side, I said, watching Clara's white blazer disappear into the street. Nathan lingered halfway down the stairs, as if deciding which world he still belonged to. I could see the war in his eyes. Love, resentment, confusion. Finally, he turned back up toward me. You manipulated him, he said quietly, the accusation raw. It hit harder than I expected, though his words were rehearsed. Echoes of Clara's poison. I steadied my breath. No, Nathan. You just didn't pay attention. He flinched, shoulders tightening. You took advantage of his illness. I stayed, I said simply. When everyone else left, I stayed. That's not advantage, son. That's love with no audience. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to sit on Robert's lap during board meetings, swinging his legs, asking questions about the family business. Then the shutters closed behind his eyes. Clara's right. This isn't over. I know, I said. It's just beginning. He turned and followed the trail his wife had carved through the crowd, reporters trailing them like sharks sensing blood. When the last flash died and the journalists turned their attention to another scandal, Harold touched my arm gently. I can arrange for a car to take you home, or somewhere quiet. I shook my head. I'm meeting someone. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. Grace? I nodded. She always shows up when the storm breaks. He chuckled. Then you're in good hands. I descended the steps slowly, every movement deliberate. My heels clicked against the stone, sharp, clean, certain. A few stragglers still lingered, whispering as I passed. I caught fragments. Power grab. Cold widow. Poor Nathan. Let them talk. I'd learned long ago that rumors die faster than truth when left unfed. Grace's silver sedan was parked under a magnolia tree across the square. She stepped out the moment she saw me, a gust of perfume and empathy. Lord, Ellie, she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like gardenias and resolve. I watched the news. You okay? I exhaled against her shoulder. For the first time in years, yes. She pulled back to look at me. You don't look like someone who just won a war. I didn't, I said softly. I just ended a battle he started the moment he trusted the wrong people. Her eyes softened. You know she's not going to stop, right? Women like Clara don't lose quietly. I'm counting on it, I replied. Grace blinked. Meaning? I gave a small smile, one Robert would have recognized, the kind that came before a strategic move. Let's just say my husband wasn't the only one who kept things in writing. Grace laughed, uneasy. You scare me sometimes. Good, I said, sliding into the passenger seat. That means I'm doing this right. As we drove away, the city blurred past in shades of gold and gilt. Charleston's charm had always been about what it concealed. The polished porches, the whispered betrayals behind closed shutters. Grace kept glancing at me, as if trying to read what was behind my calm. You really think you can outplay her? I turned toward the window, watching the sunlight flicker off the church steeples. I don't have to outplay her, I said quietly. I just have to let her reveal herself. We stopped at a red light near the waterfront. Across the street, I caught a glimpse of Clara again, standing beside a black car, phone pressed to her ear, expression carved in fury. She saw me. Our eyes met across the traffic. She smiled then, slow, venomous, and mouthed two words I didn't need to hear aloud to understand. Game on. The light turned green, and Grace's car rolled forward. I leaned back, the faintest smile curling at my lips. The calm had arrived, yes, but only the kind that comes before the next storm. The first headline hit 2 days later. Widow under fire. Questions rise over haze. Industries will by noon. Every local outlet in Charleston had picked it up. By evening, national business blogs were running variations of the same story. The phrasing was identical, almost surgical. Sources close to the family suggest Eleanor Hayes may have amended portions of her husband's will posthumously. I didn't need to guess the source. Clara had always preferred knives that glinted in daylight. Grace arrived at my house with takeout and fury in equal measure. She tossed the newspaper on the counter. They're painting you like some conniving widow from a courtroom drama. I glanced at the photo. Me on the courthouse steps, eyes half-shadowed, mouth mid-sentence. They'd caught the only frame where I looked unsure. Clever, I murmured. They're going for sympathy through suspicion. Grace crossed her arms. It's slander, Ellie. No, I corrected softly. It's strategy. Outside, the tide lapped against the lake's edge, slow and patient, the kind of sound that reminded me to breathe. Grace leaned against the counter. Nathan's giving interviews now. Said the handwriting on the final clause didn't look like his father's. I froze, the fork halfway to my plate. He said that? On camera. Channel 8. The air in the kitchen thickened. Nathan had always been the quiet one, the diplomat. Clara must have cornered him with guilt. Or worse, fear. Grace lowered her voice. They're trying to force you into defending yourself. I smiled faintly, though my chest burned. Then we won't defend. We'll demonstrate. She frowned. Meaning? Meaning I don't fight rumors with words. I reached for my phone and scrolled to Harold's number. He answered on the second ring. Eleanor? It's begun, I said. I've seen the reports. Clara's been busy. She's efficient when she's panicking, I replied. Let's review the contingency clause. He hesitated. That's not meant to be public. It doesn't have to be, I said. Just effective. A pause. Then the sound of shuffling papers. Your husband was clear. If the legitimacy of the will is questioned, the sealed codicil can be invoked. But once we open it, the power shifts completely to you. I turned toward the window. Across the lake, the reflection of the house lights trembled against the dark water. Then it's time to shift. By morning, my inbox was an open wound. Hundreds of messages, most unsigned. Gold digger, fraud, shame on you. A few came from employees I'd known for decades, men who'd toasted my wedding, women I'd mentored. Betrayal always arrived in lowercase letters and perfect spelling. Grace caught me reading one over coffee. Don't you dare let them get in your head. I'm not angry, I said quietly, just taking notes. Notes? People show you who they are when they think you've fallen. She sighed. You sound too calm. I have to be. If I react, I become the villain they've scripted. If I wait, I looked at her. I become the headline they didn't see coming. Grace shook her head with a small, weary smile. You really scare me sometimes. I know, I said. That's why you keep me grounded. The phone buzzed. Harold again. His tone was brisk. Eleanor, I've drafted the necessary notice. Once you authorize it, the codicil is activated. Do it. You're sure? Completely. By dusk, Clara's smear campaign had reached its crescendo. Social media swarmed with speculation. Anonymous blogs claimed insider knowledge. And Nathan appeared on a late evening news segment face tight, saying he just wanted transparency. I watched from my study, the TV glow cold against the mahogany walls. The irony of him parroting her words didn't sting anymore. It clarified. Every betrayal was now catalogued, every lie time-stamped. When the interview ended, Grace turned to me. You could still sue them for defamation. No need, I said, reaching for the envelope Harold had messengered over that afternoon. My name was written in Robert's handwriting, familiar, unshakable. I traced it with my thumb. Robert built his legacy on patience. Clara's undoing will come from speed. Grace leaned forward. What's in it? The next move, I said, sliding the letter opener beneath the seal. As the wax cracked, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the lake. Low, promising. I didn't flinch. Let her talk, I whispered. By the time she's done, she won't have an audience left to listen. The wind caught the curtains, and for a fleeting second it sounded like applause. The codicil was as cold as the storm that had begun to sweep across the lake. The wax seal cracked beneath my fingertips with a satisfying snap, and I unrolled the paper slowly, as if pulling apart the last thread of a secret that had been waiting too long to be revealed. Harold sat across from me, his hands folded neatly in his lap, the quiet before the storm surrounding us like a vacuum. The room was dim except for the slanted light that crept through the windows, reflecting off the polished desk. I didn't need to look at him to know what he was thinking. His loyalty to Robert had never wavered, but the truth was now more than ink on paper. It was a test. "Eleanor," Harold said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself, "I don't know how to prepare you for what's in this." I met his gaze and smiled, a flicker of something colder than grief flashing in my eyes. He knew they would come for me, Harold. That's why he wrote it. The first document I pulled out was signed, dated, and precise. Robert's handwriting, so familiar and yet distant, swam before my eyes. It was almost like hearing his voice again, though I would never forget how it felt to sit beside him, still, in those final months. Harold cleared his throat. "This codicil was meant to remain sealed unless the family disputes the will. It grants you full control over the estate for 10 years. 10 years? My pulse quickened. No challenge allowed? None. He nodded, glancing over at me. He trusted your judgment, Eleanor. He knew you'd protect his legacy, the one he built from nothing. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of Robert's unspoken faith settle around me like a mantle. Then I'll use it to test everyone else's. Harold seemed to brace himself, leaning forward slightly. What are you going to do now? I didn't answer immediately. My mind moved faster than my words. The codicil wasn't just a lifeline, it was a weapon. It gave me the power to restructure, to correct the path the business had been headed on, and most importantly, to show the people around me who had been playing this game for their own selfish ends that I wasn't going to be their pawn. I was their queen. The wind outside rattled the windows, a low howl that seemed to echo my thoughts. The gusts picked up, sending the curtains billowing against the walls as if trying to remind me that everything was changing. "Time to put it into motion," I said softly. Harold didn't speak immediately, and I could feel the hesitation in his silence. "You know Clara will be relentless. She'll do anything to discredit you." I smiled, a sharp edge to it. Let her. Let her show me exactly who she is. This is about more than just the company. It's about power, Harold, and I'm going to let her believe she still has it." I folded the codicil carefully and slid it back into the envelope, securing the seal with a soft press of my fingers. "Tomorrow, I start the restructuring." Harold's brow furrowed. "You'll need to move quickly before she gets any more ideas about turning Nathan against you." "I'm already ahead of her," I said. The words tasted like the bitter beginnings of revenge. Later that night, I sat in my study, the glowing embers in the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. The house felt alive, like the calm before a storm, though I knew this time it wasn't a storm of nature that I was preparing for. It was a storm of my own making. The first emails began to trickle in before midnight. Employees who had been loyal to Clara, to Nathan, were already reaching out with quiet apologies and pleas for direction. I reviewed them all, one by one, as the storm outside raged. Every word was measured and each decision made quietly. People were positioning themselves already, seeing which side would offer them power in the wake of this battle. The next morning, Clara began her usual tirade. I could hear her voice even from a distance, the shrill accusations, the demand for an explanation of why Robert's will had suddenly changed. The headlines flared up again, louder this time, but Clara's words felt like the cries of someone drowning. The more she raged, the more the world began to see the cracks in her facade. I gave them no answer. Instead, I went to the board meeting with a quiet assurance that rattled them from the start. By the time I was finished, half of the leadership team had been quietly restructured, their loyalty shifting as easily as I'd predicted. Power didn't stay in one place for long. A few hours later, Clara's calls went unanswered. Nathan was quiet too, his silence heavy with uncertainty. That afternoon, Grace came by, a drink in hand, her smile more like a challenge than a greeting. You really think you can make it through the next few months like this? I leaned back, the firelight flickering across my face. I'll do more than that, Grace. I'll rebuild everything. Her eyes softened. You really are something else, aren't you? Only when the world makes me, I said, standing to meet her gaze. And I knew then that nothing would stop me from claiming the future Robert had left behind. Not Clara, not Nathan, not anyone. As the storm outside raged on, the future was no longer uncertain. It was in my hands. The phone call came late in the morning, cutting through the quiet of my study like a knife. Harold's voice was clipped, sharp. Eleanor, they've begun a smear campaign, financial mismanagement, leaks to the press, and they're already circulating within the company. I set the glass of bourbon down carefully on the desk, the ice clinking softly. The warmth of the drink was an anchor, but the tension rising in my chest was not. Clara, I murmured, leaning back in my chair. She doesn't know when to stop, does she? I've been in contact with a few trusted people in the accounting department. It's false, of course, but they've already latched onto it, Harold continued. If they're not stopped soon, it could turn into a bigger scandal. I closed my eyes for a moment, considering. Let them think they're winning for now. We'll handle it on our terms. I heard the hesitation in Harold's voice. You know she'll come at you harder. And Nathan? He trailed off, knowing the weight of those two words alone. Nathan will follow her for now, I said, my voice steady. But he'll return to me. He always does, when it's too late to save himself. Harold sighed, defeated, knowing there was no stopping me. Then I'll prepare the audit report for the press. I hung up without saying another word. The dinner was planned for that night, and as I adjusted my dress in front of the mirror, I could feel the pulse of what was coming. Clara had taken the bait, and now it was my turn to reel her in. Grace's voice echoed from the hallway as she approached with the wine. You're really inviting the snake back into the garden? I turned, offering her a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. So I can watch it choke itself. Grace's face softened with concern, but she hid it with a laugh. I admire your nerve, Ellie, but I'll admit, you're pushing your luck. You'll see, I said, adjusting the hem of my dress. This is just the beginning. The dinner was held at the estate, Robert's estate now, and the weight of its stillness pressed down on me, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Clara and Nathan arrived promptly, Clara's sharp heels clicking against the marble floor, her smile too tight, too practiced. Nathan followed behind her, looking like a man walking into his own execution, avoiding eye contact with me. I watched them both closely as they took their seats. Clara's posture was perfect, too perfect, her eyes darting from me to Grace and back again, always calculating, always pretending. So, Eleanor, she began, her voice like honey with a sharp edge, how's the restructuring going? She already knew the answer. It was no longer about business for her. It was about power, control, and keeping the world from seeing how far she'd fallen. I smiled politely. Quite well. I've made a few key changes, but the company is still strong. It's just a matter of restoring balance. Nathan glanced at Clara, his unease palpable. Balance, he repeated, his tone flat. That's one way to put it. Clara didn't let him finish. You know, I'm curious, Eleanor, she continued, leaning forward just enough to make the tension rise. With all these changes, are you really sure the company isn't going to collapse? She was pushing, trying to test my composure. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the moment stretch out longer than necessary. You've got it wrong, Clara. The company is fine. What's at risk is your reputation. I'd be careful what you spread around. Her smile faltered for just a second before she regained her composure. You think I care about that? I'll destroy anyone who tries to take what's mine. I could feel the coldness in her words, but I wasn't rattled. In fact, I welcomed it. Her threats were just the beginning. She wanted to burn everything down, but I'd be the one standing when the smoke cleared. Grace placed a hand on the back of my chair. You really have a knack for turning the tables, don't you? Don't be so sure of that, I whispered to her. We're just getting started. Dinner was strained. Clara's fake smiles became more exaggerated, more forced. The conversation was carefully crafted to poke at the edges of my resolve, but I remained unfazed. Every word, every gesture was calculated. I let her dig her own grave while I quietly watched. At the end of the meal, as they stood to leave, Clara leaned toward me, a sharpness in her smile. You'll regret crossing me, Eleanor. This isn't over. Her words hung in the air like the scent of perfume, sweet but dangerous. I rose, meeting her gaze. I've never regretted a thing in my life, Clara, and I'll be here when you finally see what your little game has cost you. As the door clicked shut behind them, I turned to Grace, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. You know she won't stop, Grace said softly. I don't expect her to, I replied, but she'll be the one left with nothing when this is all over. I moved to the window, watching Clara's sleek car speed away. She thinks she's still in control. She won't be for long. Grace's voice was low, almost concerned. What's your next move? I smiled, a cool and calculating smile that felt right on my lips. We wait for her to make the first mistake. And I knew, as sure as the night stretched out before us, that Clara would. The press conference was scheduled for noon, though the reports were already circulating. The whispers of Clara's anonymous leaks had become a tidal wave, lapping at the edges of public trust. But Clara had miscalculated. She thought she was running the show, but in her desperation, she'd made a fatal error. She'd underestimated me. Harold stood beside me as the journalists filed in, their eyes darting between me and the fresh stack of papers on the table. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady. I have prepared these documents for your review. They are the full audit reports for Hayes Industries, covering the last 2 years. I am confident that they will demonstrate the financial integrity of this company and put any rumors to rest. I slid the audit reports across the table. The flash of cameras was instant, a chorus of sharp clicks, but I held their gaze without flinching. Clara wasn't there. She didn't have the courage to face the truth now that it was exposed. Behind me, Harold watched with a quiet satisfaction as the journalists leaned forward to examine the pages. I could almost hear the wheels in their heads turning. Are you concerned about the leaks? One reporter asked, leaning into the microphone. Not in the least, I said, my voice clipped but firm. What matters is the truth, not the lies being spun behind closed doors. This, I tapped the documents, speaks for itself. The room fell into a hush as they sifted through the reports. Then, one of the reporters stood up, a grin spreading across his face. This is unexpected, he said, before lowering his voice. We've received documents linking a specific IP address to the original financial leaks. Do you have a comment on that? The tension in the room shifted like a live wire. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Clara's anonymous leaks had already begun to crack under the weight of their own deception. You're absolutely right, I said, voice soft, almost conspiratorial. And as it turns out, that IP address was traced directly back to someone very close to this company. I let the words hang in the air. The murmurs started, rising in volume as the press realized what I was saying. Clara Hayes, I continued, each word carefully measured. My daughter-in-law, who has spent the last few weeks spreading false rumors to undermine me. The room erupted. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, but I remained calm. In the midst of the chaos, I could almost hear Clara's panic across town, the horror of her realization. Harold leaned in, voice low. They'll be looking for her response now. I'm sure she's already crafting it, I said, my eyes scanning the crowd. But the truth, gentlemen, doesn't need a defense. It stands on its own. As I finished speaking, the storm of questions began. How did you know it was Clara? Another reporter pressed. Why didn't you come forward earlier? I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle over the room. Because I didn't need to. When people speak the truth, they don't need to fight for it. And when they lie, the truth always catches up. Minutes later, the conference was over, and I walked out of the room with my head held high. The reporters were still murmuring behind me, but none of their questions would matter anymore. The first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Later that afternoon, as I sat in my office, Harold came in with an update. Eleanor, the board is requesting you stay on as CEO. They've been reviewing the press conference and the audit reports, and they're impressed. I glanced up at him, my fingers tracing the edge of the documents on my desk. Impressed? Absolutely. They recognize the integrity of the company, and they want to make sure you're leading it forward. They're formally requesting you remain in control. I stood slowly, letting the moment settle in. Then I'll make it mine entirely, I said, a fire lighting in my chest. This company doesn't just belong to Robert or anyone else. It belongs to me now, and I'll make sure it reflects that. Harold nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It's your move now, Eleanor. I walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. The view of the lake was peaceful, serene even, but I knew what was coming next. Clara's rage would be unleashed, but this time, there would be no place for her to hide. As I turned away from the window, I felt something shift within me. The calm before the storm had passed. And now it was my turn to claim victory. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as the directors shuffled into their seats, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. A small circle of the most influential members of Hayes Industries were assembled around the long, polished table, the company's future resting on their decisions, but also on the fragile threads of my willpower. Harold stood near the door, watching with quiet determination, knowing the storm that was about to break. But I was unshaken. My time had come. I adjusted my glasses and waited, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uneasy. Let's begin, I said, leaning forward, hands folded neatly on the table. I assume you've all had a chance to review the recent audit and press statements. The room shifted as a few heads nodded, but it was Nathan's absence that lingered in the air. His loyalties had already begun to unravel, and I was certain the board would soon see through the mess he had let Clara drag him into. Just then, the door burst open with a sudden force. Clara, wild-eyed and furious, stormed into the room. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, a sharp contrast to the calmness of the rest of us. "You're destroying his legacy," she screamed, her voice shrill, desperate. "You have no right to do this. This was his company." The board members flinched, some visibly startled by the intrusion, others glancing nervously at me. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. "I'm not destroying anything, Clara," I said, my voice calm and composed. "I'm restoring it." She shook her head violently, pacing as she spoke. "You're rewriting everything. My husband's blood, sweat, and tears. And you're stealing it all." I let her rant. She had no grip on the narrative anymore. Her words were the last gasps of someone drowning in their own delusion. With a slow, deliberate motion, I turned my attention back to the board members. "Gentlemen," I said, turning toward them with a sense of finality, "the facts are clear. I have made the necessary changes to secure the future of this company. I paused, making sure my words landed with precision. And Nathan, I added, is no longer in a position to lead. His actions have created a clear conflict of interest. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Some faces shifted in discomfort, others in relief. I'd never seen so many people who knew what was right, yet hesitated to act on it. But the time for hesitation had passed. Mr. Hayes, I addressed Nathan's seat at the far end of the table. I trust you'll step down from your position as a director for the good of this company. Nathan had been standing by the door, his face unreadable, his gaze flicking between Clara and me. He seemed to hesitate, torn, caught between his loyalty to his wife and the truth he knew was now inescapable. I'm not going anywhere, Nathan said, his voice low but firm. His hands clenched at his sides, and I could see the struggle inside him, but there was nothing left for him to do but concede. Without warning, Clara lunged at me, her hands reaching for my throat, her face twisted with raw, unbridled rage. You ruined everything, she screamed, her nails just inches from my skin. This is my company. The guards were on her in seconds, pulling her back before she could reach me. Clara struggled against them, but it was futile. Her venomous words, her fury. It was all a display, a desperate attempt to cling to something that no longer belonged to her. The boardroom was a frenzy of cameras, whispers, and shocked faces. The sound of Clara being dragged out echoed through the room, her rage fading into the distance. I stood up slowly, straightening my jacket as if nothing had happened. The chaos around me felt almost surreal, like I was watching someone else's drama unfold. You just lost the company, I said quietly, my voice cold, measured. And you lost your composure. The cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every moment. Clara's humiliation was complete. She would never recover from this. The board members exchanged glances, their unease now turning into full-blown panic. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Now, I said, turning back to the board with a sharpness that cut through the tension. It's time to vote. I'm here to stay. One by one, they cast their votes. The tension in the room was unbearable as I watched each hand lift, each board member quietly but decisively choosing to back me. Finally, the vote was complete. The chairperson's voice rang out clearly. The motion passes. Mrs. Hayes, we officially request you remain CEO of Hayes Industries. The victory was mine. But as I stood there, the full weight of the moment settled in. I wasn't just the CEO anymore. I was the one who had rewritten the rules of this game, and I'd done it without lifting a finger to defend myself. As the room quieted, Harold leaned in, his voice low. You've done it, Eleanor. I looked out the window, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the clouds, shining down on the sprawling estate below. For the first time, the future felt like it was mine to shape. The evening was quiet, the kind of silence that settled over a room after a storm had passed. But in my office, the calm felt temporary, like the last moment of stillness before a bigger wave would crash. Harold arrived just before sunset, a file in hand. The look on his face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. A glimmer of something sharper, darker. I knew better than to ask until he was ready to speak. He set the file down in front of me without a word, then sat across from me. We found something. I didn't open the file right away. Instead, I looked at him, studying his face for clues. What's this about? Clara? He said simply. I think we've figured out how she's been financing her smear campaign, and it's worse than we imagined. I leaned forward, now more alert. Go on. He slid the file toward me. These are documents related to a series of offshore accounts. Clara had been diverting funds from Hayes Industries for months before Robert passed. Money was being funneled into these accounts. Accounts I'm certain she's been using to fund her attempts to destroy you. I opened the file slowly, my eyes scanning the paperwork, the figures, the names. There it was. A trail of money flowing out of the company and into the shadows. A system of hidden offshore funds, disguised under layers of false names and accounts. And right there, in bold print, Clara Hayes. So that's how she funded her lies, I muttered, feeling the weight of the discovery settle in like a lead anchor in my chest. Harold nodded grimly. This wasn't just a business strategy, Eleanor. This was personal. She has been planning this for longer than we thought. I sat back in my chair, running my fingers over the file, the pieces finally clicking into place. Clara's desperation wasn't just a fight for control of the company. It was about maintaining the life she had built on deceit, on manipulation. And the money, the hidden accounts, were the tools she had used to keep herself afloat in a world she no longer had a hold on. I looked at Harold. Do you think this will be enough to make it stick? To expose her? He sighed, pulling the file back toward him. We can press charges, but you need to understand something. This could destroy Nathan too. He's been complicit in her actions. Whether he knew the full extent or not, his hands aren't clean. I paused, my eyes lingering on the paperwork in front of me. Nathan. The man who had once been my son, who had allowed Clara's venom to turn him against me. He had betrayed me, but more importantly, he had betrayed himself. If Nathan's involved, then maybe it's time he learned what betrayal really costs, I said, my voice cold. I had long accepted that there was no room for sentiment in this battle. Not anymore. Grace had been right. Nathan would have to choose his side, and when it was over, I'd make sure he knew exactly what it meant to play in the shadows. What are you going to do? Harold asked, watching me carefully, knowing my next move could change everything. I stood up, the decision forming in my mind as the evening light cast long shadows across the room. We're going to let Clara think she's still in control. Let her believe she's won. Then, we'll expose everything at the annual gala. Harold frowned. Eleanor, that could backfire. You know how public this event is. Are you sure? I turned toward the window, looking out over the estate, the water glistening like glass beneath the fading light, the calm before the storm, the quiet before the reckoning. She'll have nowhere to hide when it's out in the open. The gala is the perfect stage for her final act. And once it's all out there, she won't be able to escape. I could feel the power shifting beneath my feet, the walls closing in on Clara. She was about to lose everything, not just the company, but the last semblance of control she clung to so desperately. Send the message, Harold, I said, my voice steady, the weight of my plan settling in. It's time to make her pay for everything she's done. Harold hesitated, but then he nodded. I'll get it prepared. The moment we go public, there's no turning back. Good, I said, looking down at the file once more, then closing it with a soft, deliberate motion. Let her think she's safe. Let her think she can still fight. It won't matter when the truth comes crashing down on her. As I turned away from the desk, the door to my office creaked open. Grace stood there, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the file and back at me. You're really going through with this, aren't you? I smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't worn in years. The pieces are finally in place, Grace, and when they fall, Clara won't be able to get up again. The night of the annual charity gala arrived like a storm in full force, sparkling with the elegance of South Carolina's finest. Guests swirled in tailored tuxedos and gowns, their laughter and chatter blending with the soft hum of orchestral music. The ballroom of the Hainsworth estate gleamed under golden chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the glow of the event's grandeur. Outside, the night was still and quiet, The stars above nothing compared to the sparkling sea of champagne flutes and glittering dresses within. Clara, ever the actress, was already in the center of the room, laughing louder than anyone else, a smile permanently etched on her face. She was trying too hard. Her expensive gown, rich in red velvet, clung to her frame, but it couldn't hide the edges of desperation in her movements. Her eyes darted nervously between the guests, looking for reassurance, for validation, for someone to believe she wasn't the woman who had orchestrated a lie that had nearly ruined me. I, on the other hand, moved with purpose. My dress, black silk, simple, regal, flowed effortlessly around me as I made my way through the crowd. My smile was reserved, measured, like a queen awaiting her coronation. Every movement was calculated. Every word that passed my lips was like a dagger wrapped in silk. The guests greeted me with admiration as they always had, but tonight, the weight of their words felt different. The air crackled with anticipation, as if everyone could feel the seismic shift about to happen. No one knew exactly what was coming, but I did. This was my moment. The moment when everything would be set right. I found Grace standing near the bar, watching Clara from a distance. She raised an eyebrow as I approached. "She looks like she's trying to convince herself, doesn't she?" "She's delusional," I replied, my voice soft but unwavering. "But tonight, the truth is going to shatter that illusion." The speeches began. Polite words about generosity, about the future of Hayes Industries, about my late husband's legacy. I stood in the back, smiling faintly, nodding occasionally. But my focus was on Clara, who seemed to be waiting for the right moment to make her own play. She wasn't prepared for what was coming. None of them were. As the speeches wound down, I was invited to the stage. The spotlight fell on me, and the murmur of the room quieted. I stepped up, steadying myself for the moment I'd waited for, the moment when the balance of power would shift entirely. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice smooth, clear, and confident. The room quieted further as I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "As you know, we've gathered tonight to celebrate the future of Hayes Industries and to support the causes that are dear to Robert's heart." I looked around, meeting the eyes of the key players in the room, and then I turned to Clara, who was now staring at me, her smile beginning to falter. "Tonight," I continued, "I have the privilege of making a very important announcement." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see Clara's jaw tighten, her eyes flicking nervously toward the corner of the room. She knew what was coming. "Tonight's donation," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure everyone was listening, "comes from Hayes Industries. But it is not just any donation. It is the reclaimed funds that were once stolen from this company." The screens behind me flickered to life. For a moment, there was only the sound of gasps, quiet, stunned breaths from the crowd. Then, the screens filled with records, the exact amounts of money diverted into the hidden offshore accounts Clara had been using to fund her attacks. The dates matched, the amounts were undeniable. Each document was as damning as the last, laid bare for the world to see. The whispers began in earnest. A few guests looked toward Clara, whose face had drained of color. She stumbled slightly, but kept her composure for a second longer. Then, the reality of it hit her. The truth had come to light, and there was no hiding from it now. Her voice cracked as she stepped forward. "This isn't true. You can't—" But the words barely made it out before the chaos exploded. Cameras flashed in every direction. Clara's arms flew up, her breath quickening, and then, as if her body couldn't bear the weight of the moment any longer, she collapsed onto the stage, fainting as the world watched. The room erupted into a frenzy. Some gasped, others reached for their phones to capture the moment. I stood still, watching her collapse like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Grace stepped toward me, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Eleanor," she whispered. "Is she?" I nodded slowly, my lips curving into a small, satisfied smile. "Her empire is built on lies, and now it's finally come crashing down." The crowd was buzzing, some leaning forward to catch every moment of Clara's humiliation. The cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the chaos, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Steady, sure, calm. Clara had lost everything in the blink of an eye. The company, her reputation, her control. But me? I was only just beginning. The morning after the gala, the world was watching, and the headlines were exactly what I had hoped for. Daughter-in-law exposed by widow's evidence. Clara Hayes, the woman who stole from her own family. Hayes Industries under investigation for embezzlement scheme. The newspapers practically screamed in bold, and the online articles were just as unforgiving. I hadn't seen Clara so humiliated in her life, her carefully constructed world falling apart in front of the world's eyes. The truth had spilled out, and there was no unspilling it. I sat in my study, watching the updates flood across my screen, but there was no triumph in it. It felt too final, too quiet for what had happened. I had won, but the weight of the victory was settling like sand in my chest. The price of getting here had been steep, and I wasn't sure the cost would ever fully be accounted for. The door opened and Nathan stepped in, looking disheveled, his shirt half untucked, his face pale and drawn. His eyes avoided mine as he entered the room, and I saw the defeated slump in his shoulders before he spoke. "She ruined me," Nathan muttered, his voice broken, a shadow of the man I used to know. I didn't rise to meet him, didn't offer the comfort or sympathy he was searching for. Instead, I remained in my chair, letting the weight of the moment fall between us like a physical presence. "No," I said softly, my eyes locking with his. "She revealed you." He blinked, his hands shaking as he steadied himself against the back of a chair. I didn't know everything. I didn't know how deep it went. She, his words faltered, and I could see the layers of guilt washing over him. I sat up straighter. "No, Nathan. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You let her manipulate you. You let her drag you into this mess, and now you're too deep to climb out." His jaw clenched. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could protect her. Protect us. "Your mother's legacy, Nathan," I said, my voice ice cold. "You thought you could protect that, but you didn't protect anything. You chose her over everything. Over me, over the company. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." I watched him break in front of me. His hands were shaking harder now, his face crumpling as he finally realized the full extent of his betrayal. His own mother, the woman who had given him everything, had been pushed aside for someone who had never cared about him, only about her own ambitions. He sank into the chair across from me, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "What do I do now?" he whispered, barely audible. "You rebuild, Nathan, and you learn what it costs when you forget who your family really is." He didn't respond. He just sat there, as the weight of it all crushed him. I couldn't find it in myself to offer him comfort, not after everything that had transpired. He had chosen his side, and now he had to pay for that decision. Across town, Clara was already packing her things. The police were involved. The investigation was underway, and she knew there was no hiding. Her flight from the city had begun as soon as she'd realized she was trapped. No more lies, no more schemes, only the wreckage of what she had built for herself, and the reality that she was now a wanted woman. It wasn't just the company that was lost to her, it was her freedom. Grace's voice broke the silence, and I turned to face her. You finally ended it, she said, her voice soft but knowing. I didn't end it, I said, my voice steady, but with something darker lying beneath the surface. Not yet. Justice isn't revenge, Grace, it's reminder. She raised an eyebrow, walking closer to me. Reminder? Yes, I said slowly, standing up and walking toward the window, staring out at the city below. That there's a cost to everything. And some things, no matter how hard you try to hide them, always come to light. My gaze lingered on the streets below, where the world continued to move, unaware of the final shift that had just occurred. Clara would run, but she couldn't outrun the truth. And Nathan? He would have to face what he had done, every piece of it, whether he was ready or not. Grace moved beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. You've won, Eleanor. She's lost everything. I looked at her, my face betraying none of the emotions that churned inside me. I haven't won anything yet. Not until every piece of this is in its rightful place. I turned back to Nathan, who was still sitting there, silent and broken. He had no more questions, no more excuses. His time to decide was over. Now it was my turn to take the final step. The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers and the clicking of heels on the cold, hard marble floor. The world outside seemed so far away, but in here, the weight of the truth hung heavy. Clara, now in shackles, stood at the defendant's table, her face pale and tight with defiance. She refused to look up as the prosecutor read through the charges against her. Fraud, embezzlement, and harassment, the same charges that had been slowly crushing her since the gala. I sat in the gallery, a few rows back, my gaze never leaving Clara. She had wanted to control everything. She thought she could destroy me, that she could rewrite the story. But now, in this room, the tables had turned. The world was watching as her empire collapsed in real time. The prosecutor stood tall, moving toward the jury with confidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've seen the evidence. You've watched the footage from the gala. You know Clara Hayes used her position in Hayes Industries to siphon off millions of dollars. She manipulated her husband's will, orchestrated a campaign of lies, and funded her treachery with stolen money. Clara's breath quickened. She sat straighter, but her hands trembled, the reality of it all sinking in. She opened her mouth to speak, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. I'm not done, the prosecutor continued. This is the face of greed. This is the face of a woman who thought she could buy her way out of everything. But tonight, we'll make sure the truth stands, and the consequences for her actions are clear. As he spoke, the footage from the gala was shown on the screen behind him. Clara's desperate, panicked face as she collapsed onto the stage, a fainting act in front of millions. The camera zoomed in on her, catching every detail of the moment. The truth, once hidden, was now visible to the world. Clara, unable to hold her composure any longer, snapped. This is all her fault. She did this to me. She manipulated my husband. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom. Order in the court. His eyes were cold as he looked at Clara. No, Mrs. Hayes, it's not Eleanor's fault. It's your greed's fault. Her face flushed a deep red, but she was too late to recover. The truth was out. She had no defense. She could scream all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the facts. Nathan was called to testify next. He hesitated as he made his way to the stand, his face drawn, his eyes clouded with guilt. The room was quiet as he sat, his hands clasped together, a man broken by the choices he had made. The prosecutor didn't waste any time. Mr. Hayes, you're aware of the financial records that were uncovered, correct? Can you confirm that you had knowledge of your wife's actions? Nathan's eyes flicked to Clara for the briefest moment. The woman who had been his wife, the woman he had allowed to control him. Then he looked back at the jury, his voice barely audible. Yes, I knew. I knew some of it. But I didn't know the full extent. I didn't know she was doing this. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I could see Clara's eyes widen, the shock and anger flashing in them. She shot a venomous look at Nathan, but he didn't flinch. I thought I could protect her. Nathan continued, his voice gaining strength. I thought she was the woman I married, but I was wrong. I was blinded by my loyalty to her, and I failed to see the truth. The jury watched him carefully as he spoke. His words, heavy with regret, were the first sign of the redemption he was seeking. Too late to undo the damage, but the beginning of him finally facing what he had done. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, we asked for a guilty verdict. Clara Hayes has taken enough from this family and this company. The evidence is clear, and the damage has been done. The judge nodded, then looked at the jury. You've heard the evidence. It's time for your deliberation. The room was still, the air thick with anticipation. Clara's breathing was labored, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Nathan's face was a study in emotion, torn between guilt and hope, as if he was waiting for the judgment that would change everything for him too. It didn't take long. The jury returned, and the foreperson stood, delivering the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The word hit Clara like a slap, her face blanching as if the last thread of her world unraveled completely. The courtroom was a flurry of whispers, cameras flashing in rapid succession. I sat there, emotionless. The scene before me was nothing more than a reminder of how far Clara had fallen and how much she had lost. But I wasn't here for her collapse. I was here to see the consequences of her actions. As the guards moved to take Clara away, her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, the world stilled. You've destroyed me, she hissed. You think this is over? I stood up slowly, my voice steady. No, Clara. This is just the beginning. I left the courtroom before the cameras could swarm. There was no need to stay. The world knew the truth now. But for me, the real work was just beginning. The trial was over. The verdict was in. Clara was guilty. The police had taken her away, and Nathan, though free, was trapped in the gravity of his own actions. The world now knew the truth about Clara and the empire she had tried to destroy. I sat in my study, the soft hum of the house around me, but inside, there was a stillness I couldn't shake. The weight of what had happened, of what I had lost and what I had gained, settled heavily on my shoulders. It was then that Harold entered. He had a look in his eyes, the kind that suggested something important, something final. He held a small envelope, sealed with Robert's signature, the wax still intact. What is it? I asked, my voice steady but laced with curiosity. This, Harold said, his voice solemn, is for you. Robert left it for after the trial, just as he instructed. I took the envelope, feeling the cool weight of it in my hands. It was small, inconspicuous, nothing like the weight of the estate or the power I had fought for. I opened it slowly, the paper inside crisp and delicate. I recognized Robert's handwriting immediately. If my wife endures humiliation in my name, my entire estate shall be transferred solely to her, in full. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The words were simple, but the weight of them was suffocating. Robert had known. He had known what would happen, that Clara would go this far. He had prepared me, given me the one thing I needed to fight for the truth, his unwavering trust. Harold watched me quietly, his face unreadable. I closed the letter and set it down, absorbing the gravity of Robert's faith in me. He had never wavered. He had always believed in my strength, in my ability to rise above. He knew this day would come, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Harold nodded slowly. He knew you'd survive it. I looked at the letter again, But now it wasn't just about the estate or the fight with Clara. It was about something deeper. Robert had trusted me, even in the face of everything. And in that moment, I understood the legacy he had left me was not just the company or the wealth, but the strength to stand tall in the face of adversity. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of victory. They were tears of closure, of finally understanding that what I had fought for was not just a place in this world, but the peace I had been searching for all these years. Grace stepped into the room just then, her gaze soft but knowing. She didn't need to say anything. She simply stood beside me, her presence a quiet support. "So, you have everything now?" she said, her voice gentle. I turned to her, the weight of the moment sinking in. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I have peace." I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawling estate that had once felt like a prison. Now it felt like a fresh start. I wasn't here for revenge or power. I was here to move forward. "Robert would have wanted this," I said softly. "Half of it will go to charity. Let it do some good." Grace gave me a small smile, the kind that told me she understood. "You're making the right choice." For the first time, I felt the burden of the past slip away. The future was mine to shape, and I would do it with grace, with dignity, and with the peace that had eluded me for so long. It was the first real day of the rest of my life. The trial was over, the war was done, and now I had to rebuild. The halls of Hayes Industries, once cold and silent under Clara's rule, now hummed with a new kind of energy. There were no more hushed conversations behind closed doors, no more whispers of discontent. The walls that had once felt like a prison now opened up to new possibilities. I wasn't just inheriting a company, I was reimagining its purpose. We restructured, yes, but this time it wasn't for power. It was for something greater. Robert had always cared about more than just profit. He had believed in people, in the community. And that's what Hayes Industries would become, a community foundation in his name. I stood by the window of my office, overlooking the grounds that had once seemed so distant, so oppressive. But now, they were a symbol of something else, a future of giving, of rebuilding not just a company, but the lives of those it touched. The mansion itself felt different. Where it had once been hollow with tension and betrayal, it was now filled with purpose. "Mrs. Hayes?" The voice came from the doorway, and I turned to see an old employee, one of the many Clara had let go. His face was uncertain, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, the kind I had seen in others who had returned to find their place here again. "Welcome back," I said softly, my voice steady but warm. "We've got work to do." One by one, the people Clara had fired, the loyal, the dedicated, returned. They came back with a new sense of pride in their work, not just because of what they'd been given, but because of what they'd been invited to create. Nathan had come to me the day after the trial, a man humbled by his choices, carrying the weight of his mistakes with him. He had asked for work. He had asked to prove he could contribute again. For all the betrayal that had passed between us, I saw the change in him. His eyes were clear now, no longer clouded by his need to please Clara or protect her lies. I offered him a position, not out of pity, but because I knew he needed to prove to himself that he could stand on his own. It was his first step in redemption, and it had to come from the bottom up. He would report to me, and that would be the only way forward. Grace came by the next afternoon, a glass of wine in hand. She sat across from me in my office, her eyes studying me carefully. "You've turned pain into structure, Eleanor," she said softly, her voice full of both admiration and awe. "I didn't think you had it in you." I looked at her, a small smile tugging at my lips. "That's what legacy is, Grace. Not in what you inherit, but in what you build. The sound of a door opening behind me broke the silence, and I turned to see Nathan walking in, head lowered. He had been working diligently, his hands steady as he made adjustments to our strategy. "How's it going?" I asked, my voice no longer cold but tempered with something different, something like understanding. "I'm learning," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Thank you for this opportunity." I nodded, knowing that the hard work was just beginning for him. But he was on the right path now. Whether he realized it or not, he had already begun to redeem himself. As the day wore on, I stepped into the halls of the mansion, walking slowly down the grand staircase, the weight of what I had done, what I was doing, settling into my bones. The rooms felt different now. They were no longer places of solitude and anger. They were filled with the hum of life, the sound of people working, of purpose being rediscovered. I stood in the doorway of the main hall, my eyes catching the first golden rays of sunset through the windows. The warmth was beginning to return. The mansion, once a place of cold silence, felt like home again. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, and I turned to see Grace approaching. She smiled at me, the same knowing smile she had always worn, but now with something else. Something softer. "You did it," she said quietly. "You really did it." I met her gaze, my heart finally feeling lighter. "Not yet, but we're on the right track." She stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. "You know this will take time, right? It won't happen overnight." I looked around at the team working in the next room, the workers gathered in groups discussing plans for the future. The work was already underway. And I was at the center of it, guiding it with steady hands. "I'm not worried about the time," I said, my voice filled with quiet certainty. "I'm not just rebuilding the company, I'm rebuilding what it means to be part of something greater." And for the first time in years, I could feel the warmth spreading through me. The darkness had finally lifted, replaced by the quiet certainty of a future shaped by my hands. The road ahead was long, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to walk it, step by step. The cemetery was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The sun filtered through the branches, casting golden light over the graves and the lush greenery surrounding them. It was a beautiful afternoon, but there was a weight in the air, a stillness that felt almost like the earth was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me. I stood in front of Robert's grave, the place where I had come to make my peace with everything, with the years of struggle, with the betrayals, with the pain I had endured. The marble headstone was still sharp and pristine. But in this moment, it wasn't the stone that held my focus. It was what I had become standing here, in this place that once felt so heavy and oppressive. Now it felt like a chapter that had finally closed. The past had laid its weight on me for so long. I had spent years trying to protect it, trying to fight for it, trying to make sense of it all. But now, the silence, this moment of stillness, felt like the world exhaling, the storm that had torn through me finally passing. I reached out and placed my hand gently on the gravestone, the cold stone grounding me as the wind picked up slightly, brushing past my skin. My mind drifted back to all the years Robert and I had shared, the love we'd had, the life we'd built together. But there was a new layer to that memory now, something I had earned through everything that had come after him. "They screamed I didn't deserve you," I whispered, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "But you knew I earned every word." I let the words hang in the air, the wind carrying them away. I hadn't realized how much I needed to say them until now. I hadn't just been fighting for Robert's legacy, I had been fighting for my own. A soft breeze stirred the trees, the leaves rustling as if agreeing with me. A quiet peace washed over me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of all those years of struggle lifting from my chest. I wasn't alone in this moment. Robert was still there, in spirit, in the lessons he'd given me, in the strength he had known I had even when I hadn't. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I glanced down at the screen. It was Harold. His message was brief, but its weight hit me harder than expected. Estate officially closed. The finality of it. The end of the chapter. And, in a way, the beginning of everything else. Robert's estate, everything I had fought for, was now officially mine. Not because I had taken it from anyone, but because I had earned it. Because Robert had known I would. I stood there for a moment, taking in the gravity of what had just been said, of what it meant. Then, without a word, I removed my wedding ring, the cool metal smooth against my skin. I held it in my palm for just a moment, then placed it gently on the gravestone. It was a final act, a symbol. The ring, once a token of love, now felt like something I could leave behind. The past, the pain, the promises, was here with Robert. But I was ready to move forward. I stood back, one last look at the grave, then turned and walked away. The mansion, the company, the legacy Robert had left behind, they were now mine to shape, to build, to carry forward. As I walked toward the car, the sunlight stretched across the cemetery, its golden rays warming the ground beneath me. The future was mine. I wasn't carrying it as a burden, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to create something meaningful, something that would honor Robert and everything he had believed in. The final line of Robert's will wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of my new life. "They missed the line," I said softly, the words coming to me naturally. But that line rewrote my life. And with that, I left the past behind me. I was finally free to walk forward toward the future I had earned.